ki te tonga, ki mā kina kina ki uta, ki mā taratara ki tai. E he ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, tihe mauri ora. Kia ora everyone, and morning. Hope you're all doing well in your bubbles and getting on with everything in what is quite a difficult time for everyone. So I hope you're all taking some time for yourselves in the evenings and keeping up that vaccine message and everything else that you've all been doing. So it's been pretty phenomenal to see what everyone has been up to supporting our communities despite being mostly at home. Awesome. So I'll go. I only have one apology so far, and that's just for lateness for Councillor Collins. I'll just get Suad to complete a roll call. That's all good.
Morena everyone. Councillor Hills present. Councillor Bartley.
Talofa from Mangere.
Councillor Casey.
Morena Suad.
Morena. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Present, I'd have to leave at 3.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe.
Kia ora, ke konei au.
Kia ora. Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora from the top of the Waitemata.
Kia ora. Councillor Dalton.
Present.
Councillor Darby.
Present.
Councillor Filipina.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koutou. Councillor Fletcher.
Wulavanaka.
Mayor Goff.
Kia ora koutou.
Councillor Henderson.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning. Member Honeck. Councillor Mulholland.
Good morning, present.
Councillor Newman.
Good morning from Roundel School, vaccinating.
Councillor Stairs.
Good morning from the top of the Super City.
Councillor Simpson.
Good morning from the wonderful Orake ward.
Councillor Stewart.
Good morning from Sunny Hills.
Councillor Walker.
Good morning from Whangaparaoa.
Councillor Watson.
Good morning from Shakespeare Regional Park, Te Harahi.
Councillor Young.
Good morning from East Auckland, Tajatao.
Member Wilson.
Kia ora, Suad.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. Over to you.
Thank you, Suad. Josephine, what has she started? You're in Sunny Hills, Sharon. I thought I was Sunny Hills. Anyway, sorry, no more puns this morning. We'll move straight to declarations. There are none. Confirmation of minutes. Could I please have a mover of those?
Happy to, Councillor Sayers.
Happy
Cool,
to second.
Councillor Sayers and Deputy Chair Coombe is what I could hear. There are all those in favour of?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Thank you. There are no petitions. We'll go to public input. We have one declined request, April Peter from Northland Waste, as we advised that the refuse charging policy review is coming later in the year, so that they may request again at the end of the year. And we have one accepted request. I hope they are online. We have Tom Hayward, David Hay, and Winona Moore from the Equal Justice Project. You have 5 minutes, but obviously if there are technological delays, we will take that into consideration. I'm not sure if you want to talk one at a time, or there's someone going to lead, Tom going to lead, and the others are there for questions, but just do whatever you can to manage the technology, and we have your presentation as well. So the presentation, I think, Suad, should be on Nexus for everyone if you can't see it on the screens.
Yes.
And also if there are issues with technology, sometimes turning off the video can help as well. So Tom or David or Winona, do you want to kick off if you're there?
Kia ora, are you able to hear me and see me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, we can hear you.
Lovely. So, kia ora, I'm Winona Moore. and I'm here representing the Equal Justice Project with my partner, Tom, if he is able to connect too.
Kia ora, everyone. Can you hear me?
Kia ora, we can hear you, Tom. Thank you.
Awesome, that's great. In terms of the presentation, it's not letting me share my screen on the video.
Okay, we'll just see if Suad can let you share, or are we sharing that, Suad?
We will share the presentation now.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Thank you for
Cool.
that.
So just if you could just let Suad please know when you would like the next slide. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
Lovely. Okay, so Equal Justice Project, we're a pro bono charity run by students from the University of Auckland Law School, and we aim to advocate for social and environmental justice within our communities. So just a little bit of backstory. Over the past 3 years, we've been working on a program of advocating to CCOs about their statements of intent. And we think that the CCO statement of intent should better reflect their accountability policy and the long-term plan. If you're able to skip to the next slide. Oh.
Yep, we can see this next slide.
Okay, perfect. So we have a particular interest in the climate change aspects of the accountability policy that was recently adopted in the long-term plan. And while we believe that this current policy is an improvement from its predecessor, we think that it can be further improved in 4 ways in particular that you can see listed below on the slide. So first, stating that the Council has declared a climate emergency and action should accord a high priority as a result. Second, providing clearer expectations about emissions reduction and adaptation, really to clarify these as 2 distinct aspects of responding to the climate emergency. Third, including more specific reporting requirements, specifically because CCOs are listed among the reporting organizations for adaptation plans and the Climate Change Response Act. And lastly, by requiring each substantive CCO to prepare and then adopt a climate mitigation and adaptation plan. I will now hand you over to my partner, Tom.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that, Winona. If we're able to go to the next slide, that would be great. Awesome. So in order to give effect to these recommendations that Winona has just outlined, it would require an amendment to the long-term plan as part of the 2022 annual plan process. In doing so, this amendment will be able to undergo the public consultation and further consultation by council members before being adopted into the long-term plan. Now, to give action to these amendments, we are aware this can be done through a notice of motion. We have prepared a draft notice of motion for you today, which outlines our proposed amendments to the policy and recommends that the governing body amend the long-term plan as part of the annual plan process next year. You should also have been provided an explanatory document written by Winona and myself, which provides background information to support the proposed motion. We understand making an amendment to the long-term plan is not a light decision for you to make, and hope this information provides the committee with confidence in why this is a rational and well-grounded action. Now, as you are most likely aware, a notice of motion needs 2 councillors to sign and countersign it. We are unsure whether a notice of motion such as this one is to be presented either to this committee or to the Appointments and Performance Review Committee, given the nature of its content. However, our suggested action to you is that 2 councillors sign and have a similar motion to this moved at the relevant committee once known. This will allow our proposed amendments presented to you today to be put into action. If we're able to move to the next slide. Thank you very much. So, as to why we believe it is the best decision for you to adopt these proposed amendments, the first is that the addition of clear-cut reporting requirements through an emissions reduction plan and an adaptation plan for CCOs helps CCOs know exactly what is expected of them, rather than them having to piece it together themselves. Moreover, by including recognition of the Council's declaration of a climate emergency in the accountability policy, it provides confidence in citizens of Auckland that our Council is continuing in their strong commitment to combat the effects of climate change. EJP is an ongoing project, And our job is not to criticize, but rather aid councillors such as yourself on how policies can be improved in this area. We want to utilize our expertise to provide you with the best advice we can in the future. And by adding this amendment, our future students will be able to provide more constructive input into CCO's statements of intent. Finally, the accountability policy is a key part of the Council's toolkit for ensuring CCOs take meaningful, immediate action. These actions will have to be taken eventually, and by adding them immediately, you are safeguarding the prosperity of our beautiful city for the benefit of our generation. I would like to thank the committee very much for hearing us today, and we are open to any questions that you may have.
Kia ora, thank you very much to the both of you. Are there any questions from committee members? I'd like to ask in the Councillor Coombe, Deputy Chair.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Tēnā kouroa, Tom and Winona. Thank you so much for presenting. Really appreciated hearing from you today. I think what you have put forward is really helpful for our understanding and thinking, and there may be ways in which we can respond that it's not necessarily through a notice of motion, but there are things that are happening, for example, like in the terms of reference for when we're appointing directors. And so this isn't really a question, but just more of a commitment that we will follow up and respond. And I know our chair has already initiated that, because I think we need to keep the dialogue going in terms of what we're doing at our end and what you've presented us today that we need to progress and that we can be doing better. So thank you very much for all the work that you have put into this presentation, and really appreciate you taking the time to present. Ngā mihi, kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for that. We really appreciate hearing that. And it's really great to know that you guys are taking these commitments seriously. And like we stated in our presentation, we're not here to criticize. Rather, we see that there is a really strong and good direction with the council, especially with the declaration of a climate emergency. And so we're sort of here to just guide you in your policies. And it's really great to hear that you're willing to keep that dialogue open. So thank you very much for that.
Kia ora, thank you. Another partai from Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora, Chair. Probably just one is, the project is great. My daughter was involved when she was at Auckland University Law School a few years back. It's more a question to the Chair. Can we have this passed on to our CCO Oversight Committee, maybe as an item to look at, rather than a notice of motion?
Yes, definitely. I've already asked for that too, because I think we can probably strengthen all of this without sort of the blunt instrument like a notice of motion, but definitely agree.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. We don't need to do that. I think we're probably pretty much all in line with this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for coming along.
Kia ora. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was a very good one. Just a question in terms of this matter specifically, but also generally in terms of the work you do. Have you been aware of the CCO review that took place last year, and amongst other things was concentrating on whether the CCOs acted in a way that reflected their accountability to the community as well as to the council, which I think is part of your emphasis here today. Have you been through that document, which has a number of recommendations and commentaries, I think, that dovetail very neatly with the work you're doing and also the recommendation you brought to us today? Are you aware of that document, and have you looked at it in any detail?
Kia ora, thank you very much for that question. I personally am not aware of that document, but our mentor David Hay is in the call right now, and he might be able to tell you a bit more about that. David, if you're on the call? Perhaps not. Well, no, but I haven't looked through that document, but I'm definitely willing to. And do you say that sort of contains content on CCOs and their sort of commitments to the council in regard to the accountability policy?
Yes, I think, Tom, I mean, the work you've been doing is outstanding, but I just think that this would be very, very helpful to that whole notion of accountability, not just back to the council, but to the community the council is responsible for too. So I just think it would be useful to have the backdrop to what was a largely almost a $1 million report that's made a lot of very precise recommendations that go towards hopefully ensuring the type of response that you're seeking through your submission to us today. So I'm more than happy to communicate with you offline to point that document in your direction, because I think it'll be useful for you.
Kia ora. Yeah, that would be amazing. I'd really appreciate that. And thank you very much for pointing us to that. That's really helpful for our work.
Oh, hey, Tom, I'm online now. David Hay here. So just to come back to that question, yes, I've been guiding Tom and Winona through, the various elements of Council's process and how the governance structure works, how the relationship between the CCOs and the governing body and the committees work. I was aware of that document, but I thought that it's Tom and Winona are quite busy law students, and it was a little bit too much detail to delve into that. So my advice to them was to look more at what's in the Local Government Act and the Local Government Auckland Council Act in terms of these requirements around the accountability policy. And that's more their strength as law students to take that kind of statutory interpretation angle on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to David. And if Suad could probably give Councillor Watson the emails of the speakers, and if Councillor Watson wanted to contact them that way, or we can go through Suad, whatever works. A quick comment from Councillor Henderson. Thank you.
Yeah, just really quickly, I wanted to just tautoko those words, and the previous speakers have kind of covered a lot of what I was planning to say myself, but yeah, as I'm an EJP alumni, I used to run the schools project when I was in law school, and it's just really awesome to hear from you guys again, and just thank you for all the fantastic work you do, just making sure our communities are more equal and can access justice, and yeah, thank you for all of that.
Kia ora, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Henderson. Member Karen Wilson, Pātai.
Kia ora, korua Winona and Tom. I'm so interested and impressed in this and where it will go. I guess my question is this: not knowing anything about this and googling you all, and looking at the promotion of social equity. My role here is as part of the IMBSB, Independent Māori Stat Board, and how that could potentially translate into social inequity around Māori as it relates to council. So watch very carefully as you traverse this part around climate change, and see where we can take the next step in terms of social inequity. Well done. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for those words. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Councillor Walker, question.
Sure. Hi there. So I get the comment and the advice that you're giving us around the distinction between climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. And I understand the necessity of reporting on those things, and I would suggest that yes, it is important to report on them in terms of accountability, and that should require a split in the budget so those things are defined. And yes, it applies to CCOs, but equally it applies to Auckland Council. So I just seek your comment around that, because as much and all as the suggestions you're putting indicate the desirability of that split, they could go further in terms of the reporting and the budgetary split, and I'd invite your comment around that. Thanks.
Kia ora, thank you for that question. And I think we definitely do think that that's a very important point to make. I guess we can't speak too much further to our exact thoughts on that, but what we are really trying to get across is that we think that it's really important for councillors to better respond to the climate emergency, particularly for our generation, and it's important for CCOs to take meaningful and immediate action. And these are just some of the ways that we've been working on that we think that could be made possible.
The other quick question I'd ask is around the issues of also reporting around scenarios as it goes to budgeting and accountability. Our present process is pretty much locked into just a single reporting construct without considering scenarios, against a background where there's a great deal of uncertainty around climate change, and arguably the need to have scenarios that indicate more resource that's required. I'd invite your comment on that.
Perhaps I could jump in here. Councillor Walker, David Hay speaking. I've been guiding these students really through a process of just looking at the legislative framework for governance of CCOs. We haven't really gone into the budgeting and planning side of things because of the way the Equal Justice Project is set up. We missed the time frame for making a submission into the long-term plan this year. But I think, you know, from my experience, I think broadly speaking, you're right that that there does need to be a more adaptive approach to things like COVID emerging more rapidly than you expect, and being able to respond to those sort of more nimbly, as it were. And climate change is going to present those sorts of challenges, absolutely. But it's a bit beyond the scope of what we're trying to do with law students in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. And last comment or question from Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, who's also the chair of the CCO Review Committee.
Yes, thanks very much, and thank you for your presentation and your comments. As Richard says, I do chair the CCO Oversight Committee, and we are trying through that committee to move into a different space from where we have been in the past with our relationship with our CCOs. That's been, we're moving quite well through that. I'd be very keen, either remotely, if this COVID situation lingers much longer, talk you through the progress that's been done. I'll get sent to you the recommendations from the review panel and where we are at with implementation of those recommendations. And that includes closer relationships with our communities, with our NGOs, and also our local boards. And climate change is obviously front and foremost in the thinking around that. And I think then I'd be really keen to actually get your interaction from that. So it brings you up to speak with where we're at, and also then you can feed us back at what more and else or different can we do or should do. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that opportunity. I mean, obviously, CCO accountability is our main focus of this, and the fact that you chair that committee and you're willing to have that kōrero with us about your progress is it's really inspiring, and it's really great to hear, and we'd absolutely love to talk about this further with you. Thank you very much.
Cool. Just if you could just send me through your email addresses and we'll get underway, please.
Will do.
Cheers.
Cool, thank you. I'll get, if it's easier, I'll get Suad to send your emails to Bill, or the other way around, whichever is easiest for Suad, but we'll connect you up. Yeah, just want to thank you again. Very good food for thought here. Myself and Councillor Watson did see the Equal Justice Project present to the Auckland Unlimited board, and they really appreciated your presentation and agreed that they were already, on that waka moving forward already. So appreciated the push there. Yeah, and more generally, obviously, you would have seen that we did call the climate emergency. We have passed Te Tārikia Tāwhiri, Auckland's climate plan. There's strong support right across this committee and council and our local boards and IMSB for action on climate change. We also have our financial disclosures, which come through the Finance Committee. We are actually doing that earlier than we're legally obliged to, which is fantastic, and all the CCOs report and have to report now on their emissions, how they're reducing them, and be very accountable, and that is put out as part of our financial disclosure documents, which is a really good way of keeping everyone on track as well. And we obviously have started adding additional climate initiatives such as the 150 million we approved through the 10-year budget, and all CCOs, not only do they present often to Deputy Mayor's committee, but they've also at least once presented to this committee to show the council laws and IMSB members what they're doing in the climate change space, both adaptation, mitigation, and sustainability in general. So there is a lot coming, but we know that with groups like you pushing us to do more and making it firm in black and white as well is helpful to ensure that it continues and we're all accountable. So thank you very much for your presentations. We might get Megan, Tyler, or someone to update you directly about a response to how it's progressing and what parts we're already doing and how we can do better. But yeah, thank you very much, and I will just get a mover.
I'm happy to move, Mr. Chair. Pippa here.
Deputy Chair Pippa Coombe has moved. Anyone would like to second that I can?
I'll second it, Richard. Bill.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No, thank you. Well, thank you, Tom, Winona, and David. Have a fantastic day, and yeah, thank you for a very concise, important presentation.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for hearing us today.
No worries. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Bye.
Kia ora, thank you guys. All the best with the rest of your meeting.
Awesome. So we're on to local board input. We have none. I'm just getting my run sheet back up. No extraordinary items. And we move straight to the adoption of sustainable asset policy for community assets. And that is item 8. The presentations and information are in Nexus if for some reason it drops out on Skype. And we have Kirk Archibald and Vivian Lee who are going to present for us. So they'll present first, and then we'll, if you want to stick question in the chat bar, as we've just done in this last item. Thank you. I assume Kirk can do the...
All right, thank you.
Oh,
it just took a little moment to come off mute. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Kirk Archibald. I manage energy efficiency and sustainability for community facilities. And I'm presenting today as well with Vivian Lee, who's one of the asset sustainability specialists in my team. All right. So the purpose of our presentation today is around the adoption and seeking adoption of the sustainable asset policy. So the sustainable asset policy sits within our sustainable asset standard, which is a much wider body of work around how we incorporate sustainability into the way we work in community facilities. The sustainable asset policy is one aspect of this, and it focuses on creating a set of minimum sustainability standards for community assets. And so our report in this presentation focuses on the sustainable asset policy and its adoption. So drawing on Te Tārikia Tāwhiri, the built environment in Auckland is a key contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and emission reduction, and hence the sustainable asset standard is an action within the built environment priority of Te Taruki Tāwhiri. Because emissions from agriculture in particular are difficult to reduce, to get to our 50% reduction target for 2030, buildings need more than a 50% reduction in emissions, or our built environment does. And so Te Taruki Tāwhiri forecasts a 65% reduction, as you can see in the slide, but for Auckland Council's operational emissions, this is more like an 80% reduction. And so deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions are possible from the built environment because it's relatively straightforward to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. Fossil fuels can be switched for electric, for example, switching gas heating to electric, and electricity is mostly renewable and becoming more renewable. And lastly, it's cost effective now for organisations like us in Auckland Council to invest in our own renewable energy generation. The sustainable asset policy is a key part of Auckland's corporate emission reduction program, and as well as being an action from Te Taruki Tāwhiri. And so the sustainable asset standard does this by eliminating emissions from new builds and making our existing buildings more energy efficient. So in this graph, the orange line represents the impact of the sustainable asset standard, and I guess that it's integral to that 50% reduction target. In terms of some detail on the policy itself, the policy requires essentially carbon neutral operation of new builds of new builds. So it's essentially saying that we won't create new emission sources from new assets that we develop. And so that can be achieved through not installing any systems that require the use of fossil fuels. So for us, that's largely around phasing out the use of natural gas and making sure that our energy is sourced from renewables. The second thing is around requiring green ratings for new builds over $10 million. And everyone's probably heard about green ratings like Green Star, which we used for Te Manawa, and infrastructure sustainability ratings that we used for the City Rail Link and in community facilities for Scott Point. So these ratings are based on achievement of credits within a project, and the credits can relate to construction materials, the ecological impact of the projects, stakeholder engagement, including mana whenua engagement, water sensitive design, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and sustainable procurement. And within that, we've used 10 million as the threshold for green ratings, as for projects below this, the requirements around certification become a significant overhead for the project. And so we're recommending that for smaller projects that we wouldn't certify, but we would follow the same sort of principles that you have in the green ratings. And we chose Green Star 5 or equivalent as a minimum because the Green Star scale is 4 to 6, and 5 represents New Zealand excellence, and it also represents where we think sits the best cost benefit for green ratings. But that's not to say that we couldn't achieve higher ratings, which, as example, is what we've done for Scott Point, where we've gone for where we've got a leading infrastructure sustainability rating, which is their top rating. Lastly, the policy discusses decarbonisation principles, which simply means that those principles would be incorporated into the design guides that we have for all of the projects that we do. So the primary rationale for the sustainable asset policy and why we need adoption from the Environment and Climate Change Committee is in the way that the community assets are funded. And so while we have many high quality sustainable assets that have been developed already, the way that the community assets are funding presents a disincentive to local boards to invest in sustainability. And the detail of that is around local boards being responsible for the capital costs relating to developing or renewing community assets, but they're not directly responsible for the ongoing operational costs. So sustainability features within buildings and infrastructure, particularly in relation to energy efficiency and water efficiency and renewable energy, reduce whole of life costs of those assets, but they typically have a higher upfront cost. So as local boards aren't responsible for ongoing costs, there is an incentive for them not to invest in sustainability. We also have some external pressures, which I've shown in this slide. So the government's planning new regulation around improving the energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions of buildings. Our gas fields are in decline at the moment, and that's starting to impact our energy costs. As an example, and this is also to do with outages in our gas fields, our gas price recently doubled for our facilities, and lastly, we're seeing a really big rise in the price of carbon in New Zealand as well, and more that's going to impact both the cost of gas and electricity as well. So in addition to the benefits that we've already discussed, this policy will also strengthen our mana whenua engagement and also Māori outcomes within our projects, which I'll discuss a little bit further. Green buildings are also typically healthier buildings in the sense that they have higher ventilation rates and they use more friendly components within them, and also paints and finishes, and also that through these projects we can improve ecological outcomes. So within the green ratings, there are credits that require engagement with mana whenua. They also require issues of significance for mana whenua in relation to the environment and ecology to be incorporated into the projects. That mana whenua's history in the area is incorporated and communicated through the projects, and so the green ratings themselves are quite well aligned with Kia ora Tamaki Makaurau. And so for this sustainable asset policy, we've engaged with mana whenua. The engagement is ongoing in the sense that it's part of the wider discussion around how we implement Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and so we're involved in those discussions that go across council around how all of the different parts of council are delivering on Auckland Climate Plan. The engagement that we've had to date with mana whenua has been through our joint hui that we have with Parks, Sports and Recreation, and meeting with the Natural Environment Po of the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum. We've also intended the first, hopefully, of more wānanga around the implementation of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri to discuss the Sustainable Asset Standard. And so the feedback we received from mana whenua was generally supportive of the Sustainable Asset Policy. They were keen to see better alignment of council and CCOs around how we deliver on Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and this really prompted the wānanga that we had, bringing together different parts of council to discuss what actions they are taking rather than what we had been doing, which was a more individual department approach. We also were made aware of Taki Māori, Taki Hone, which is a framework developed with mana whenua and Panuku and used for the Onehunga Wharf development. And so this framework we see as complementary to the green ratings that we've been doing, in the sense that we're recommending, in the sense that the framework can inform aspects of green ratings, and the green ratings can inform aspects of Taki Māori, Taki Hone. It's worth noting that the Sustainable Asset Policy doesn't take place, doesn't supersede any project level engagement. It just provides a formal framework around and requirements around that, and also requirements of evidencing that engagement and the outcomes and how that's been incorporated into the design and build of the asset. As part of setting a regional policy, we needed to engage with the local board, and so in 2020, late 2020, we engaged with all local boards on the Sustainable Asset Policy, and around creating a requirement for them to achieve green ratings and carbon neutral operation, and incorporating decarbonisation principles into their projects, and the impact that that would have on creating that requirement would have on their decision making. All of our local boards supported the policy and where we were going. We had 6 local boards that highlighted concern around the cost of green ratings and the impact that would have on existing budgets. So in discussing budget impact, most of the studies on green buildings show a modest cost premium between green rated and unrated buildings. Some studies don't show any. For this policy, we've assumed a 2 to 6% premium. About 1% of this are the costs of the green rating itself, and that's the certification and also the reporting requirement to write submissions, and the rest of the cost relates to the sustainability features themselves. Whole of life costs are typically lower, and in commercial settings, green buildings provide a higher return on investment than unrated buildings. So the sustainable asset policy was included in option 2 of the climate investment package, which as it wasn't funded, instead what we've proposed to do is to fund the cost of the policies from existing budgets, and I think this is covered fairly extensively in the report, so I won't talk to it too much. But it does mean that in the next 3 financial years, it means for 3 projects in particular, essentially that they won't be able to de-scope the requirement for a green rating from those projects, and that could put some cost pressure on the projects. But through the LTP, we did receive funding for the operations component, and we also had some funding reinstated for sustainability projects in general across community facilities. So we think, and lastly, for those 3 projects, they're already pursuing green ratings at the moment. So we think it's unlikely that there's going to be any major impact on them. And then from financial year 25 onwards, we're expecting that we can build any additional costs simply into our baseline budgets. So lastly, to summarise, adoption of community facilities sustainable asset policy as a regional policy means that it becomes a requirement for local boards, and so essentially if projects budgets are under pressure, the green ratings aren't able to be de-scoped out of these projects. It's something that needs to stay in them. The second thing is it means that new assets don't add to Auckland Council's greenhouse gas emission inventory. And lastly, it means that whenever we're developing large new assets, that development is consistent with Te Tarakia Tawhiri. Thank you, that's all.
Kia ora, thank you so much, Kirk. That was a very good presentation and explained in a really understandable way a lot of detail that I think would have made everyone quite comfortable with the, yeah, it seems to be the questions are being answered by your presentation, so thank you. I'll move the recommendations, and Councillor Al-Filipaina as Chair of PACE will second those, and we will go to questions. We've got Councillor Cooper, sorry. Oh no, did you, wait, I'll just check.
Yeah, mine was answered, thanks.
Perfect. I'll go to Member Wilson after the questions. Thank you, Member Wilson. Unless you had a question. Cool. Councillor Simpson back on the question list. Oh no, apologies, I've missed Councillor Walker from the beginning. Apologies, Councillor Walker, you go first.
Yeah, hi there, Kurt. Good report. I've just got a question around the scope of what we're proposing, and an area that might otherwise be missed out that's part of community facilities, and I'm talking about the park space, and I'm assuming that the park space is in scope. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Sure. So The question I'd ask is, in the park space, there are issues that go to decarbonisation and accounting and carbon neutrality that go to the asset, which is the land, the soil on the land, the trees that are on the land. So, for example, in our park space, there's a substantial amount of emissions by way of methane, which is one of the most troublesome of the greenhouse gases. And also, if you've got a park and it's in grass, there's a substantial relative amount of carbon required to mow it, compared to, say, having an area that might be put into a meadow or planted in trees or the like, which would then act as a carbon sink. Now, I know other cities have rating systems for parks and are actively looking at decarbonisation and the like. Is this something that you can incorporate into this particular strategy? Because as it stands now, it's focused on buildings, and yes, I understand that, but my question is around the other assets in the landscape, which in dollar terms actually amount to significantly more than the value of the buildings.
Sure. So what we've tried to focus on is addressing that issue that we have around the way that we're funded and making sure that that we're making decisions that take into account whole of life costs, and I guess making sure that's not an issue for delivering on Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. But and also the other thing for us that's pushed us towards buildings is around our initial target around reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030 relates to our scope 1 and 2 emissions only. So we're not within the plan that I showed you before. We're not including contractor emissions in that plan, and that's not to say that we're not working in that space. It's just that that the work that we've done at the moment addresses our direct emissions, and so I think the point that you make around reduced mowing, we have a trial at the moment around reducing mowing frequencies in the Waitemata local board, and the idea is that based on that we could then, and the results from that, we could expand it. We also have a lot of work happening with our procurement department at the moment around better understanding our scope 3 emissions. So these would be the emissions associated with mowing and maintaining our facilities, and then also we've got some work that we're looking to get started soon around getting a better understanding of all the carbon sinks that you've talked about too, which we could ideally bring into our emissions inventory, because they are very significant in relation to our emissions.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand what you say around scope 1 and 2 emissions and contractors, but the animals that we own are an asset. We value those. There are different valuation systems. The fencing on the parks, the soil actually has a value. We invest money in grass, trees. So even though there may be some contractual arrangements and costs, if you add up the value of these assets, they're actually quite substantial, and there are decisions that are made on those assets that I would suggest could be in the scope of this policy, and really should be. It's the logical place for it to be. So I just put the question to you: can we go a bit further? That might not be at this stage, but it would be desirable to include those assets. And part of the reason for that is around the speed of decision making that we can make, and the rapidity within which we can bring down reductions as compared to investment in buildings, which tends to be more of a long-term asset response. So I'd invite your comment, Kirk.
Sure. I think for the policy we're talking about today is really focused on buildings and also setting those minimum standards around under what circumstances do we get a rating. I think the work that you're talking about fits into this wider piece I alluded to around incorporating sustainability into everything that we do within community facilities, and so that's something that we're going to have to pick up over time. But I agree with you, and the idea is that we're working with all of that wider piece of work, that we're working towards the next long-term plan on that one, and having something much more holistic than just what we have at the moment, which is the focus on Scope 1 and 2 emissions and on minimum standards for green ratings.
Yeah, thank you, Kirk, and thank you, Councillor Walker. Very good points and questions, but I think, yeah, as Kirk said, this is sort of a two things happening in parallel. This is very specifically to the built environment, but remember we did have that recent workshop, I think it was PACE Committee, regional parks, and ramping up the work there, but also balancing out, the needs. So whether you have mowing or no animals, or diesel run mowers, or those are all decisions that are being made on top of the planting, which we've already banked 200 hectares of new planting in the regional parks in our current 10-year budget, and that will only increase. But definitely good points, but it's slightly outside of the scope for this, but it is definitely happening at the same time, and I'm sure Councillor Filipina will can provide more detail on that as well. The next question, Councillor Simpson.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and apologies for mucking around with being on and off the question list. But Kirk, you've done a great job. Thank you very much. I support this work. I just wanted to clarify, though, the financial situation. My understanding is when you were talking, you said this would come within budget, but I just was going to ask you a question around point 56, where you say, if adopted by this committee, the SAP will ensure that if project budgets are under pressure, which from my opinion they may be, green ratings are not descoped during the design process. So you're saying that, and then in 57 you're asking us, so no matter what happens with costs, we need to find the funding rather than take it out for this particular element. Is that what you're saying there?
Yeah, that's correct, in the sense that if we need to find cost savings within a project, then that's from descoping the project rather than descoping the requirement to get a green rating and have sustainability features.
Right, got that. Thank you.
Good question, Councillor Simpson, and we were very clear last year that this needed to be, I think Councillor Dalton actually and others, calling of business as usual as opposed to a separate fund, that it needed to be incorporated, much like health and safety and other things. So it's just ensuring that when we, like all projects, every project, regardless of the time or what the policy is always looked at from a cost perspective, or descoped or changed, or it's just that this sustainability asset component can't be the first thing that drops off, and it can't drop off. But we have added collectively more budget to this as business as usual to ensure it happens. And if you look at current assets like Te Manawa and others, a lot of this was already there, yeah. Anyway, and it is about the reducing emissions, but also saving costs on water and energy and things like that. So there's lots of good financial outcomes too from this long term.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just go make sure. So was there any other questions? And then we'll go to Member Wilson, then Councillor Filipina for comment. But I just want to ensure there's no more questions before we move away from that. Perfect. So I assume both Member Wilson and Councillor Philippina are wanting to comment as part of the debate, or is it a comment as part of a question? Sorry, it's a bit. I just want to make sure we get it the right way around.
Complimentary from myself, Mr. Chair.
Cool, thank you. So we'll go straight to you then, Member Wilson. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Kirk, absolutely top-notch presentation from my perspective, very comprehensive. And I would say in terms of you spent a bit of time on the queries I would normally have had in the Māori space. Well done to yourself, to Taryn and the team. But my only comment is around the Take Mauri Take Hono tool that will be used by or applied by the community facilities. And it is a complex one, as you well know, and you are engaged in that sphere, but just making sure that's tidied up in its use and understanding would be appreciated. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Member Wilson. Councillor Philippina.
Tēnā koe, Rihari, and look, thank you so much, Chair. My only comment is that I look forward to the same comments from Councillor Walker when we have our meeting in November around the regional parks that we had our workshop on the 29th. So just look forward to the conversations there. Kia ora, and well done, Kirk. Ka pai.
Kia ora. Are there any more comments? Looks pretty good to me. Well, I'll just briefly comment. Yeah, thank you to Kirk and Vivian and the whole team and community facilities team. This is fantastic work. It is really well done presentation-wise as well. And as Member Wilson was saying, with in the Māori outcome space, and the fact that the consultation on each individual project will be in partnership from the beginning as well. So that's really put out there quite well. Around the 5-star rating on the larger buildings, and thank you for incorporating that the principles will be across all renewals on assets, although it won't be always at that potentially at that 5-star because of the cost outweighing the benefits. But I think we are seeing great leadership right across council now, but this just embeds it and makes sure it's sitting there, and it will save over time the costs. And from everything from energy to water to the built, the materials we use, we've got to be thinking that way. And thank you so much for making this business as usual. And those conversations over the last year have made that really obvious. You and the team are doing that. Also in the waste space, with the construction and demolition space, I know that Mark and the team are doing pretty phenomenal work there on community facilities, but also as shown through our disclosures that some of our biggest emissions are coming from that waste to landfill, and sometimes dwarfs the great work we're doing in other areas. So that is really important that that's being incorporated too. So just want to say thank you again. Yeah, it's fantastic, and I'm sure the community, local boards, and everyone else who will see this rolled out will be backing it and excited as well. So the more we can celebrate it as those community facilities are renewed and built to show them in tangible ways, the better as well. So thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Lots of ayes. Any opposed? Perfect, thank you. Could I just have that, could I clarify that was carried unanimously? Perfect, thank you. And we will move now, sorry, I'm just going to bring up the run sheet, but item 9, I know that much. Right, our end of year report for natural environment and water quality targeted rates. I think we've got Rachel Kelleher and Craig McElroy will present the presentation, and once again this presentation is on Nexus, and the full reports are on the agenda.
Kia ora tātou. It's Rachel Kelleher, General Manager, Environmental Services here. I'm going to start the presentation. I'm just going to see if I can get it up on my screen. Hopefully you can see that now. Just checking that you can see that.
Yes, we
Yes,
can
we can.
see it.
Thank you.
We can just see the whole screen. So if you want to make it into a slideshow.
How is that?
It's dark for me. It's just black. Maybe move the. I'm not sure if anyone else can see it, but if you can move the slides forward and back, that might work.
Can't see anything, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, so maybe just go back to the other screen and we can look at our ones on Nexus if we can't see the detail.
Okay.
Yeah,
Apologies
so we
for
can.
that.
Yeah, we can see the slideshow, and it's just not zoomed in, but that's fine.
Okay. All right, so today myself and Craig McElroy, General Manager for Healthy Waters, are going to just share some of the achievements delivered through both the Natural Environment Targeted Rate and the Water Quality Targeted Rate over 2020 and 2021. The Natural Environment Targeted Rate, as you'll be aware, was introduced in 2018, and for the Natural Environment Targeted Rate we have 311 million over 10 years, plus an additional 107 million from the extension in the 2021 and 2031 LTP process. And while we draw approximately 31 million each year, the planned budget does vary from year to year based on the program needs. So some years we do have bigger needs, for example, large-scale pest control operations over and above the existing work, which does require sort of peaks and troughs from a budget perspective. So the targeted rate program is delivered by Environmental Services, but in partnership with other parts of Council. So we work very closely in a co-delivery model with community facilities on things like Kodi dieback and the program to expand our animal and pest plant control in local parks. We work closely with regional parks, equally on those types of programs along with Kodi dieback, REMU, and also our compliance teams as well. There's 5 main programs, so the plant pathogen program, our mainland integrated site program, our islands and marine, expanding community action, and enabling tools. So just some of the highlights over the past year. You'll see there's been a big focus both from a CapEx and OpEx perspective on bringing a number of tracks right across the region up to a Kodi safe standard, so both in regional parks and local parks. And despite some significant disruption through COVID, we were able to achieve 33.6 kilometres across regional parks and almost 9.5 kilometres of track upgrades in local parks, and installed over 31 hygiene stations across both the regional and local park network. One of the exciting things that we were able to achieve this past year was also to leverage from our current program additional funding through Jobs for Nature central government funding to support job creation focused on additional track work that will complement the Natural Environment Targeted Rate work. We delivered over 80,000 hectares of pest animal control across the region, and feral pigs on Waiheke and Argentine ants on Aotea are now tracking towards eradication status. So some really great progress made for those programs. One of the things that we were able to establish through the targeted rate was a pilot for a contestable grant called the Community Coordination and Facilitation Grant, and that's a grant that is really focused on enabling community groups doing conservation activity to engage or employ additional support to help them with the facilitation and coordination running costs of their projects. So we were able to support 44 projects. So that was 35 new projects and 9 projects that were receiving multi-year funding. And we've just ticked over 1 year of having the Te Aki Tamaki Makaurau conservation portal up and running. So it's the website that we've set up to basically hold a range of information about the conservation estate in Auckland to provide best practice guidance on a whole raft of different activities that groups might be carrying out, to give information about where things are happening so that groups can connect. So it's really very much a one-stop shop for both our organisation but also communities wanting to know more about what's happening for conservation in Auckland, and to know more about how they can help. Not on this slide, but definitely worth a mention too, was that we've really ramped up our ability to do more in checking and managing the biosecurity risk to our islands. So we carried out over 446 inspections of ferries, and over 200 high-risk loads of material going across to islands were checked with our biosecurity dog team to make sure that they weren't taking nasty travellers or passengers across to our pest-free islands. And a world-leading first was the certification of the first 2 Cody dieback detection dogs, which we'll be working with into the future to help with the quicker diagnostic of Cody dieback presence. So really looking at different ways that we can deliver our work more quickly, more efficiently, and sort of demonstrating best practice. So just a little bit, just to show you just the budget spend for last year. We were slightly behind the planned spend. The budget for the 2021 year was set ahead of COVID coming into the country, so that did cause some impacts for us, both in terms of contractor availability, pause of work, but also the council or the organisation taking a careful approach to managing its staff recruitment through that period as well. One of the other things too that's been a factor in the spend for last year was that some of our partners that we work closely with, the timing for their ability to be able to fund or co-fund projects that we're working on together has changed, and so we have pushed some projects that were planned to start last year out slightly to enable us to partner with organisations also impacted by COVID. And some of that work has had some additional benefit, not just the Jobs for Nature funding, but we've been able to leverage some additional funding through Predator Free 2050, which is going to be supporting our eradication of pests off Kowal Island. So some good reasons to defer work for that past year, which is going to see some increased outcomes and benefits for council as we move forwards. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Craig, and Craig, if you just let me know when you want me to move through the slides.
Yeah, kia ora, Rachel, and good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. Lovely to be with you this morning. Just want to introduce the water quality targeted rate, and first of all to highlight or remind you of the fact we've got 5 program areas which are highlighted on the screen, so I won't read those out. What I would like to say is that the rates was introduced in 2018, started off at $452 million. Now, with the increase through the LTP process, we're now looking at an additional $218 million, giving us a total of $670 million from 2021 to 2031. I'd also like to acknowledge the great collaboration that's occurring with Watercare in relation to the Western Isthmus program, and also the collaboration with the Regulatory Department around both the closing the gap or our contaminant reduction program on the on-site wastewater system compliance. And obviously we were somewhat impacted last year by COVID-19, but I think overall we achieved a great set of outcomes. Next slide please, Rachel. So just getting down to a little bit more detail, in respect to the Western Isthmus and the improvement program, big outcomes for the year were the St Mary's Bay stormwater tunnel and marine outfall, the commissioning of that work. Also the Kahu Bay and Freeman's Bay stormwater separation project. So if you look at the communities impacted by those 3 project areas, that's another more than 3,700 properties. that are benefiting from that upgraded network, and obviously the marine environment is also benefiting from those improvement projects. Also a big focus on stormwater catchments with respect to safe networks, so 190 hectares of inspections, and that's delivered a massive benefit to those specific areas. Also like to highlight the work we've done in the on-site wastewater area. So at the moment Council has some 12,000 records, and there's still 28,000 systems that don't have a record, and our plan is going forward that those systems will be in place, and it'll probably take us about 2.5 years to have all 40,000 recorded. But of the 12,000 records, we're able to work through the detail of 6,000 records in the last year, and you'll be interested to know that of those 6,000 there are 500 follow-ups underway. So roughly 8% of those systems that were subject to inspection have required additional work to be done. Also, we made great progress last year with the Ute trial, and what we are working with iwi at the moment is how we can grow the program for this year. I'd have to say that's been a little bit frustrated by COVID and some of the practical issues of getting those new teams up and running, but it's certainly our intention to grow Ute substantially this year, and I'd like to think by the middle of the year we'll have up to 12 Ute teams in place. And also, as I indicated, also we've done a lot of work around the sediment program as well. As you're aware that sediment is a major issue for us, and with the support of Regulatory, we were able to do nearly 6,000 site visits at building sites, and interestingly enough, quite a significant number of infringements were picked up as a consequence of that work, with nearly 740 infringement notices. So there's no doubt about it that the resources, both the human and the financial resources that have been put into these areas of inspection, is actually proving to be very fruitful. Next slide, please, Rachel. So on the budget side of things, despite the problems with COVID, we still managed to over-deliver against our budget. So we had a budget of $39 million a year, with an actual performance for the year of $45 million, which was a very pleasing result. Next slide, please, Rachel. And something that we did this year for the first time, which I think has been highly successful, is every local board in the region has had a snapshot of the performance in relation to both the environmental targeted rate and the water quality targeted rate. And so that stat shot is something that we will be doing annually from now on, and I think we're more than happy to make all of those snapshots available for all of the councillors to understand, not only within their own local area, but what's been achieved across the region. I think one of the great benefits of the program and the increased resourcing is that we've now got proactive programs occurring in every local board area in Tamaki Makaurau. Next slide, Rachel, which is actually the last slide, which is just the open invitation for Rachel and myself to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Craig. Amazing work as per usual for you and your teams. Just phenomenal, the increase you've managed to get out happening in the community over the last couple of years, and including last year. Right, so Councillor Cooper and will move. Oh, right, you've already got that there, and Deputy Chair Pipacoon will second. And now we'll go to some questions. Councillor Walker has question first.
Got a few questions just around the and first of all commendations just around the pest stuff, and I'm looking particularly at the possum trapping and the like. From a a carbon retention point of view, that kind of pest management generates phenomenal results. Is it possible to have any reporting on that? I mean, even just rough estimate stuff would be useful, because if you control possums, you retain a lot of carbon, far more so than what you would otherwise. So just a quick question there to start with.
And I think that's a very good question. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Certainly it's something that we could look at in terms of giving you some estimates of the benefits that we see through preventing the loss of vegetation through controlling possums. You know, there would probably be a degree of coarseness around that, but we understand generally what level of consumption possums carry out across forest environments, and through the control we could come up with some sort of rough calculation of how that benefits that carbon picture. So happy to have a look at that for you.
Okay, if you could get back to me on that, that'd be great. The other question I've got is for Craig, and it just goes to sedimentation. I recently saw a presentation that Jeff Reed gave to the Environmental Defence Society around sedimentation around New Zealand, including Auckland, and it was just devastating, especially from clean fills, a number of which are within the Albany ward and Rodney. It's of huge concern that there are large ongoing flows of sediment leaving those areas that appear to be not always well monitored. Any comment on what we're doing in that space, Craig?
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Look, we're doing the absolute best we can with the current level of resources to be as proactive as possible, but it's an area where if we had additional resourcing, we'd obviously be able to do more. But right now, we're doing all we can with the existing resources. It's a real battle, as you're aware, and I think it's an area that we've already had previous conversations around the need to put more stringent plans in place around putting a lot more focus on the developers taking direct accountability for these issues. It's certainly an ongoing challenge for us.
Just in that respect, are you feeding into the process that we had reported to us yesterday around the monitoring evaluation of the unitary plan?
Most definitely, we're very heavily engaged in that process, as you can imagine.
And the other just broad question I've got is it's really good to have reporting and obviously having some numbers. Having said that, it would be really helpful if those numbers were within the larger context. For example, you can report on streams and generate a number. If that is within the context of the number of or the kilometres of streams within Auckland, it's more relevant. Same with on-site wastewater, obviously, great work there, but we really need that contextual picture, that is the visits and the like relative to the total number that we need to address. So is it possible to have any contextual information so that we're reporting against the bigger picture?
Yeah, look, I think you raise a real valid point there, and that's something I'll certainly take back to the teams, and we'll have a talk to them about it. And that was the reason why I wanted to highlight with the on-site systems, for example, the fact that although we did 6,000 inspection records this year, that still leaves 34,000 to go out of our grand total of 40,000. That's why I also highlighted the fact I think it's going to take us a good 2.5 years to get through that whole schedule of properties, but at least we're making good progress.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And the suggestion or question I'm putting applies equally to Rachel across the area that obviously you're over. Is it possible to have some contextual reporting in the future?
Certainly, that's something that we can also look at for a number of our programs, and there is some information that may provide you some of that context in the attachment in the report, which is part of our operational reporting that we're required to do for the Regional Pest Management Plan, but we can certainly look at that as well.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Right. Councillor Darby, you have a question?
Oh, thanks, thanks, Chair. Thanks all. Look, the budgets here have been, thankfully, substantially increased, and you know they've come off a pretty low base. And when you increase budgets like this, there's always a risk of poor quality spend, you know, lack of tracking and auditing and that sort of thing. So, Rachel, Craig, could you give us an idea of what systems are in place in your respective units to ensure there's good auditing of the spend, to ensure, you know, the expected outcomes for the dollar spend are delivered, and you know, there's ongoing checking to ensure that we are getting the very best outcomes, the expected outcomes for every dollar that's spent, and there is a keen eye on you know, making sure there's no poor quality spend that turns up from these quite significant budgets.
I'm happy to kick off, Councillor Darby, then I'll hand over to Rachel. Look, we pride ourselves in Healthy Waters that we have a very open and transparent approach to all of our projects. All of our projects have really good quality assurance attached to them. We bring in independent advisory teams to help us with a number of our program areas, and we are determined to be fully accountable for the community for every dollar that we spend. We're extremely open and honest with our community groups. We share information, and I can assure you that we have got absolutely nothing to hide, and we do our utmost to ensure the best use of our dollars. Over to you, Rachel.
So can I just come in there before we go to Rachel? So post-project, are there post-project audits? Are there good back office systems like that? It's not just about transparency, I hear that, but are there post-project audits to ensure that the deliverables that were expected have been delivered and there is good, you know, ongoing value for money? And Craig, I'm not wanting to sound like the eternal cost accountant here. I know that at some stage, there are going to be eyes on this budget, you know, to the degree that maybe they haven't been to date, to make sure that the spend is really delivering what was expected. So I'm looking for, you know, auditing processes. Has your finance team, has that been beefed up to ensure that the operational team has got that, you know, that finance back office support, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so on our whole capital delivery, we have a full gateway process that goes all the way from conception through to commissioning and handover. And part of that process is a full closeout report done on all significant investments. And would be very happy if it was appropriate to share that information with you, Councillor Darby, so you can see the thoroughness that's associated with making sure that at the end of the day we deliver the outcomes that we say we were going to deliver, and we're held accountable for delivering those outcomes. I'd also like to make the observation is if we're going to, with what Three Waters reform is occurring, irrespective of the number of entities, I think there's a general acknowledgement there is going to be independent economic regulation, and part of that economic regulation we're putting major focus on delivering outcomes as promised to communities. So in many ways what we're doing now is just getting ready for a future regulatory environment anyway. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Craig. And there's probably not a lot more to add to what Craig's already covered because we follow a similar approach. But what I would say is that for the natural environment targeted rate, we've got a high level of portfolio, program and project management discipline that we're applying to that, to the spending of those funds. And like Craig says, that follows the investment development framework that Council has adopted. All of our projects have got a strategic assessments which are documented. We've got our investment documentation, KPIs, a little bit different, some of our work in that we don't sort of naturally have the closeout perhaps that Craig does for some of his projects because the nature of plant and animal pest control is that it's ongoing, but we've got clear milestones, KPIs that we're measuring our progress against. And of course we've also got commitments that we've made to the public through things like the regional pest management plan, of which the targeted rate is helping to deliver. One of the new things that we've done this year actually is greater investment in training our staff. So not all of our staff are project managers, but most of our staff are responsible for delivering some element of a project. And so we've been putting a greater emphasis into upskilling and training our staff to understand the requirements of good project management, and that's something that we'll be taking forwards on an ongoing basis.
Oh, thank you. Look, that's good to hear. I appreciate that from Rachel and Craig. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Councillor Watson with a question next.
Yeah, more by way of a comment. Just further to that notion of accountability, Craig and Rachel, just expression of support for that local reporting mechanism that has been introduced via the local boards. I think that's been really good and really important, given that everyone's paying these targeted rates. And one of the obvious questions that we get as councillors is well, what are we getting for it? So I've certainly appreciated that kind of local board breakdown of what's going on with the various rates, and I think that's really important to continue. So thank you for that. And just finally, just to reinforce the notion that Councillor Walker mentioned in terms of that presentation on sedimentation. I know it's a problem region-wide, but in some areas it's particularly evident and has been for quite some time. So certainly, Craig, would appreciate identification of what sort of resource might be required there, because that is an ongoing concern that has been around all parts of council for quite a while. And given the sort of good work that's being done elsewhere, it'd be useful if you were enabled to continue that in an area that is really important on a whole number of levels. So thanks for that.
No, thank you, Councillor Watson. I'm happy to do that. And I'd also want to point out that with the new water regulator, Te Mata Arawai, that's been set up by the Crown, although their focus on day one is drinking water quality, they've also been tasked to look at stormwater and wastewater issues as well. So I'm very confident that the question of sedimentation is going to come up as part of that stormwater conversation.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Councillor. And also keep in mind that there are other budgets that do also cover that work, as this is only what is presented is only covering what's funded by the targeted rates. There are other budgets as well. The next partai member, Wilson.
Kia ora. Thank you all. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Craig, for the presentation. How you can do that with such a wide remit is beyond me, but thank you. I agree absolutely to try and cut my kōrero down with Councillor Walker, Darby and Watson in terms of specificity in an area, for instance, if it was south, and specifically for iwi Māori. I heard you say, Craig, the Two in a Ute project, and seemed to be the only one that was referenced. Be really good to see how that's working, even in a financial / Māori way. Is that working or is it not? That would be my interest, the financial and social outcomes. So maybe I'll coach this more as a, because it's an information only paper as more commentary, just to see how we can tease that out a bit more, and specifically around improving and restoring Te Mauri o Te Taiao and Te Mauri o Te Wai. Is there some work that's going to be done there, and some cultural monitoring performance measures? Will they be included in the future?
Kia ora, Karen. Yeah, I can give you absolute assurance that we're committed to improving our working and reporting back to iwi Māori in this space, and perhaps I'm happy to share with you offline a lot more of the detail that we're doing in this space, because I can assure you it's an area that we're extremely active in at the moment.
Kia ora, we just got a bit spoilt in the previous presentation where there was a whole section on it, but happy to do that offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Councillor Fletcher, did you want to speak, or are you happy just for me to read out your comment? I can't hear Councillor Fletcher, so I'll just say that Councillor Fletcher said she didn't need a question or speak, but just want to commend Rachel on the outstanding work she's undertaking. Cool. Councillor Coombe, Pātai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. Thank you to everyone who's worked on this kaupapa. It is looking very impressive, and it's great to see how the targeted rate is achieving results in a very directed way. So that's all good news. And I know the snapshots are very useful for the local boards, and it's great to see that highlighted. My pātai is really just looking ahead on how we're going to make this information more public facing. I think some of the questions have already touched on this, but is there can we just talk through the very specific steps around the comms, and how we're actually going to share a lot of this good news and great work?
I can pick this one up to start with, Craig, and then hand to you perhaps. So we have annually done an annual report that's been made public on our targeted rate progress, and so we'll be looking to do the same. We also have an our Auckland story that will go out after today, which will provide information summarising the highlights from the past year as part of that telling the story. I would agree that it's something that we need to keep working on, and part of our program moving forwards is to build some additional ability for sharing more of the work that we're doing out externally, and so we've got plans afoot for that, with some of the deferred resource that we had expected to have on board last year coming on board shortly to provide some support for that. Craig, do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, just echoing Rachel's points around our Auckland story that's coming out following today's meeting, but also so that we try to take the advantage of all of our project activity to celebrate milestones and ensure we get good media coverage as our projects travel through their life cycle. So it's an area that we put a lot of effort into ensuring we get maximum publicity around our projects, and I think it's an area that because of the nature of a lot of the work we do, we've been pretty successful, and also there's obviously massive stakeholder engagement and involvement and community involvement in just about all of our projects.
I think that's a really good point from Craig, and just that, we do take a very proactive approach of sharing the work that we're doing throughout the course of the year. We've got interesting work, and a good example of that would be some of the track reopenings we've done, but also the work that we've done with our Cody dieback detection dogs, which actually made the story that we did on that, made it sort of internationally, and I think had some of the widest ranging reach of any media that we've media comms that we've put out. So, we're definitely doing all we can to get visibility of the project as we're delivering them, as well as at the end of the year too.
Thank you. Appreciate that work, and also just the level of detail and getting the information out to local groups. I know who've particularly across all of this work, but especially around water quality and just the concerns that the work's been held up. But actually, a lot of it is progressing, and it's not for the lack of budget. There's a whole lot of factors. So just getting all of that information out there. And I just raised that because I just had responded to a query about what was happening with the Newmarket Gully wastewater project, as one example. I just wanted to, I don't need to comment further, Mr. Chair, but just to, very happy to be seconding this item and to thank everybody for outstanding work. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Deputy Chair Coombe, thank you. Partai from Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll quickly preface so I don't have to make a comment later. I just want to say, in front of us we have two outstanding leaders with fantastic teams behind them, and I'm so proud of the work that the two of you do. Thank you. And the way you, Rachel and Craig particularly, work with us over the last year, Shane and I, in our area, our big Kari dieback infected area. So my question is around, I think the Mayor would have received a letter from Chris Ballantyne from Rivercare Te Waiō Parera group from Te Atatu Peninsula, who have the mammoth task of, as a community group, they've taken on wanting to look after that creek and waterway, extensive catchment that goes into that, which I'm looking out on in the moment. But what I suppose for me is this difficulty when we have water care and healthy water roles crossing over, and when we have, for example, water care do have the Northern Interceptor project, which will ease the sewage overflows to that area. But how do we communicate to that community what we're going to be doing in that area? There's a monitoring program going in there, but actually doing the work, because there's significant overflows there, which is contributed to by the stormwater, but it effectively is because we've just got massive catchments of Hobsonville Point, West Harbour, a whole lot of new growth going over the waterway into Te Atatu. How do we communicate and kind of help that community do the job they want to do and show them the pathway to cleaning up that waterway and what our role is in there? Sorry, it's a long question, but it is a big subject for us.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor Cooper. What I can say from the outset is that the working relationship we now have with Watercare is the best that it's ever been, and going forward we are determined to work so that from a public point of view it's dealing effectively with the one organisation. And you're absolutely correct that until we get the wastewater and the stormwater systems working in synergy, we're not going to achieve the outcomes that we need. So we do now have joint planning teams that have been established to make sure that we get the right infrastructural solutions, and I think Healthy Waters is the part of the council group that's happiest to take the lead and make sure that the Watercare team become involved in these community projects as well. But definitely please point any community groups in the direction of Healthy Waters, and particularly Adam Shellhammer, who heads up our community group within Healthy Waters, would be delighted to work with local communities in the space.
A community meeting, thank you, but I'm sure that'll give some good information for the Mayor to respond to the letter from the community. Thank you, Craig and Rachel.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Cooper. Comment from Councillor Simpson. We'll just go into comments. If there are any more questions, I'm happy to take them from someone who hasn't had a question, but we'll just go straight into comments now. Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I want to add my thanks to Rachel and Craig. You've both done an exemplary job. You've got fantastic teams. And Craig, to you especially, any time I have needed you, you've been there. So I just want to do a big shout out to both of you and your willingness to engage with us. I want to touch on, I think if you had anyone wanting to move or second this, Richard, you'd probably have 21 people wanting to move it and 21 people wanting to second it. I just want to make a couple of comments, though, around the transparency of targeted rates. There is more transparency around a targeted rate than a general rate. The audit process that we use for reporting on the spend on a targeted rate is pretty good, and I'm more than happy to do a memo or something to even highlight that if any councillors are concerned around that. But they really are. That's the advantage of a targeted rate. It is targeted for the spend and the project, exactly what the money has been put aside for. I also just want to touch on the fact that as councillors, we go through the angst of setting rates. And when it comes to selling the good news of the outcome of that rates in the areas which we are voted from, it's really nice if we can be part of that. The benefit, of course, is in every local board area, but the decision to rate or not to rate and the amount of that rate is made around this table. And so I just emphasise the fact that I think that as councillors, this is a mayoral thing across the region, but as councillors, I think, we really need a role in that comms locally. We've done a lot in finance team about getting out to every councillor and local board as to what projects and the spend that has occurred in the area. We did that quite a lot as part of the LTP and, of course, the emergency budget as well. So those are just my comments. It's fantastic work, and I think it's really working out to be a great outcome for Auckland. So, Mr. Chair, thank you, and to Craig and Rachel, a huge thanks to you and the team.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Great points and very very important points. So thank you. Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thanks. And, I want to follow on from what Desley has said. First of all, to thank staff, to Rachel and Craig and all of their teams for a fantastic effort. And this is a paper where we can celebrate things that are being done to protect and enhance the environment. But I also want to put out a thanks to councillors, because 3 years ago, when I put up the two targeted rates to enhance the environment, it did take courage on the part of those that supported those rates. And that courage, I think, was then reflected in 2-1, the public of Auckland in the submissions and in our polling, saying yes, they supported it. And they supported it because of, I think, one of the reasons that Desley has raised, that transparency. They didn't mind. In fact, 2-1, they supported paying more rates for ends that they thought that would be good for the city that they lived in and their kids would grow up in. And, maybe there's a lesson in that in regard to climate change as well. But there are two specific things that I want to acknowledge. First of all, St Mary's Bay, Craig. I wasn't much impressed when the community, said that they didn't want us to do it in this way or that way. But the investment we've made has cut by 80% the wastewater overflows into our harbours in the heart of the city, and that's been fantastic. The second thing is about sedimentation that a couple of other councillors have already mentioned, but councillors might have noticed in the Herald this morning quite a big article by Anne Gibson. A couple of years ago, I went out with the Closing the Gaps team and looked at some of the building sites around the city, and it was bloody appalling. The sites weren't well organised. There was, you could just see the sediment running into the drains and out into the creeks and therefore into the harbours. And in the last year, we've done something like 6,000 inspections. And Craig, I want to thank the teams that are out there doing that work. and that resulted in something like 739 infringement notices being issued. And, you know, a rare positive thing in the Herald this morning saying, yeah, council said they were going to do this and now they're doing it, and a minister and the Environmental Protection Agency and others praising the council for getting out there and walking the talk. So there's a lot to celebrate in these, and you know, once again, a big thanks to those councillors that supported my targeted rates back in 2018, and for the staff that have turned our decision into a reality of a better environment for Auckland. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Stewart says she doesn't need to speak, but wants to thank Craig and his team for all they do, especially around the Angelo catchment. So thank you, Councillor Stewart. Was there anyone else who would like to speak to the item?
Richard, do you think you should get Rachel to talk to her point in the sidebar?
Yeah, no, that'd be good. Rachel, did you just want to mention the further work on the comms?
Oh, yes, thank you. And I should have mentioned it before, but we do also have a rates insert going out on the targeted rates in November. So that's just an additional piece of work we're doing to share what we are achieving through the natural environment targeted rates across Auckland with our Aucklanders.
Kia ora, thank you, Rachel. And I'm wondering if we could get the natural environment targeted rate and water quality targeted rates, those kind of infographics maybe sent out to councillors as JPEGs or something. That would be a helpful way to get some of those quick data out there. I mean, I know we can screenshot it from our own computers, but that could be helpful too for social media. I just want to say, yeah, congratulations again to the team, both teams, all teams, and also to the community who've been backing up a lot of this work too. A lot of this work has enabled significant increases in volunteers and community organisations and communities, local boards, mana whenua, whoever wants to be involved with these environmental projects. This money has also enabled that, and that dollar, that spend, that ratepayer dollar has gone a lot further because of the ability to have a place and a way to engage and also work in a coordinated way across Tamaki Makaurau. So I just want to highlight some of the things. 33 kilometres of tracks reopened, which is phenomenal. And that's in the regional parks, almost 10 kilometres in the local parks as well. 80,000 hectares of pest animal control delivered across the region. Those numbers are astonishing. 1,500 properties were visited to inspect private drain connections. That is methodical, complicated work, and the teams doing that have been amazing. Almost 80,000 trees planted as part of the program. Almost 6,000 inspections conducted on construction sites. It's just significant work, and it's fantastic that through the 10-year budget we've also been able to continue this work for another 3 years on top of the 10 we had already planned to do. So this isn't everything, and it's important that when we talk about this with our communities, this is the sort of big icing on top of the cake of what we're doing in the water quality and environment space, because there were and there is a lot of other parts of the budget and council that is doing this work. This is hundreds of millions of dollars of additional work that we know is so important to biodiversity, water quality, and as the Mayor said, community who submitted on these rates, were very much in favour of this. So I think, it's just another fantastic show of what we've supported, but also what the community wanted and demanded of us. And, we're stepping up, but we always know we can do more, especially in this changing climate. So thank you very much. I will put it to the vote. Councillor Cooper and Councillor Coombe have moved and seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? No. Perfect. That is carried. Now, I know we've only got 2 small items to go, but if we have a 5-minute break, especially for staff so they're not tethered to their computers, just have a 5-minute break to go get a cup of tea or go to the bathroom or have a stretch, and then we'll come back. So 11:55 ish we'll come back. Thank you. katoa. Thank you very much. Where are we? My Nexus has closed, which is always fun. Just be to us and also present in case there are other questions. Denise and Jacques. So Adam, are you on the line?
I am here, yes. You're breaking up a little bit then. Just can you hear me okay?
Cool. Can you? I can hear you. Can you hear me all right? Am I
yes,
still...
that's good. That's good. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. That'll help. There's a is there a presentation in the end?
Chair, there's no presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. So you might have to remute your... Can anyone?
Kia ora, Richard. I think you're cutting in and out. So why don't I just pick up on this item? Are you able to just confirm that? And can you see the chat bar? Okay, I will press on, members. So we've had it confirmed that there's no presentation to this, but was there anything that you need to bring to our attention in the report?
Sorry, yes, yes, I'd just like to make a few comments.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, and kia ora koutou. So just to reiterate that the purpose of this report is to seek a delegation to approve the council's submission on the draft emissions reduction plan. So we're not seeking sign off on the submission today. So I'd just like to make a few points that are just reiterating what we've put into the report. And firstly, that is just a brief reminder that the emissions reduction plan is part of an extensive climate change programme which has been undertaken by government. So we have the Climate Change Response Zero Carbon Act, which sets a national target to reduce emissions for all greenhouse gases to zero by 2050. And that's with the exception for biogenic methane, which has a separate target. And that's all in support of New Zealand's commitment to the Paris Agreement. The Act itself requires government to set 5-yearly emissions budgets out to 2050. And the National Emissions Reduction Plan, which will be in place by the end of May 2022, will set out strategies and policies to meet the first of those budgets, and measures for meeting the second and third budgets as well. Next year, there would also be a National Adaptation Plan, which responds to the first National Climate Change Risk Assessment, and the Act requires risk assessments to be carried out every 6 years. Also to note that government is also addressing climate change throughout the resource management reforms for both mitigation and adaptation through, for example, land use planning and intensification and identification of areas to avoid for development. So the report today is not about the content of the National Emissions Reduction Plan, which was only released yesterday, but rather to delegate authority to approve Council's submission once that's developed. A full review hasn't yet been possible, but just very, very high level, the discussion document covers sectors including transport, waste, energy, building and construction, as well as those cross-cutting systems issues such as planning and finance and funding. As you already all be aware, that Council has significant interest and has developed existing strategic direction in this area, including through Te Tauruki Atawhiti, Auckland's climate plan. And as such, we will not, in the main, be developing sort of new positions through the submissions process, but instead the submission will be based on relevant strategies and existing agreed positions in recent submissions, which includes Council's response to the Climate Change Commission's draft recommendations to government and Ministry of Transport's transport emissions pathways to net zero by 2050. So once the submission has been drafted, it will be circulated to elected members, IMSB and iwi for input, and we'll be looking for feedback on any areas in the discussion document not covered by existing council positions. So as mentioned, today we're seeking delegation to the chair and deputy chair of the committee and a member of the IMSB to approve the submission once finalised. So thank you, and that's the conclusion to those comments.
Thank you, Adam. I'm just going to check. I think Chair Hills is back on again. Richard, do you just want to confirm, or I go to? Okay, well, while we're just checking that, I will move on to the Pātai. Councillor Walker.
Sure. How is it possible for other councillors to feed in Pippa? For example, if I've got some suggestions, could I email you or Richard? And I guess the reasoning around this is to ginger up the submission.
Always welcome your contribution, Councillor Walker, but can we just hear officially how the process is going to work? And I'm sure the draft will be circulated, but Adam, are you able to confirm?
Yes, as we noted in the report, we'll be drafting the submission based on previous submissions, so there will have been input from staff and elected members, local boards and iwi into those submissions. So we're basing it on those existing submissions, and then we'll be circulating that around to elected members again, as well as other staff as well, for stakeholders, to comment on what we've put in there, to confirm that you're happy with what we've put with previous position statements, and to add your comments to anywhere where there's gaps between what's in the discussion document and what we've said before. So does that help answer that question?
Thank you. Great.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now. You ready to take over?
Yeah, thank you. Not sure what happened. We took a break and then my Skype took a break. Apparently I could hear you all, but you couldn't hear me. So I'm sorry about that. But thank you for jumping in. Thank you. So I can only see the Pātai from Member Wilson. Is she next, or were there people before?
Yes, it's Member Wilson is next. That was the only previous question was Councillor Walker, and that's been answered.
Perfect. Member Wilson, thank you.
Thank you, and I heard the kōrero around looking at feedback that's been received from the Kaitiaki Forum, IMSB and iwi, and I'm just confirming that will be done, other iwi, which iwi, and also in terms of the government and its key requirements in terms of the reduction plan as it relates to treaty. So is that separate from what the submission, or taking cognizance of that, is my question, my Pātai.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Sorry, could you just clarify those two questions then, so I make sure I'm clear on what it was that you asked? Sorry.
Sorry, I'm not at those heights as councillor. It's Member Karen Wilson. And
sorry, Member. Sorry.
Yes. So it is. You did mention that you'd be looking at utilising previous feedback received from individual iwi, from the Kaitiaki Forum, from IMSB, to merge into this plan. And I guess I was just also asking, confirming that was the case, that what, if anything, in terms of the key requirements the government is including around the treaty to enable equitable transition for iwi. Is there any consideration on that in terms of the submission, please?
Yes. So I haven't had a full analysis of the discussion document yet, but I have noticed that Te Tiriti partnerships are included in there, so is a consideration in the document, but I haven't had a chance to to analyse that yet, nor with stakeholders either.
Okay, so you did mention the feedback. I'm just canvassing in terms of the submission, whether it's yourself as the pen or as a council submission, whether that will be included. That's all.
Member Wilson, it's Megan here. Yes, absolutely confirm that. So we will include the feedback we've heard previously from Forum, IMSB and iwi themselves. And we'll certainly look further at the treaty matters and would certainly keen for your thoughts, and we can work with the Secretariat on that as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Member Wilson. That's twice now. Sorry, Member Wilson. Yes, this and to both of those questions, yeah, because the advice only came out yesterday from the government on their plan, it was always going to be a crossover of how much information that could be readied for today. And the team, I know Matthew as well, I was working on that. And we will ensure that will go ahead. And yes, we are definitely making sure all of this goes back to all members to be involved and have a say, but largely with these submissions they are we try and have them based completely on plans, policies and other documents that we have all already approved and already consulted on. This is not going to have any surprises pop up or new ideas that no one's already had a democratic say or view on. This is based on our current plans and policies and previous decisions. So it will be built from that, and obviously including some of our work we're doing on our transport emissions reduction plan as well. Are there any more questions on this one? I'm assuming you can all hear me. I will move this. Is there a seconder?
I'll second then. Chris Darby.
Councillor Darby will second. Perfect. Right. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Thank you all. Any opposed? Awesome. Thank you. That is carried. Next we have item 11, which is the summary of information memoranda. Is there any discussion, concerns, comment? No. So I'll have a mover for that.
I'll move, Kathy.
I'll second, Angela.
Cool. Councillor Casey, Councillor Dalton, thank you both. Very quick off the mark there. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Perfect. Consideration of extraordinary business. There's none that I know of, and we didn't push any at the beginning. So we don't have to move that. And I officially call the meeting to close. Oops. Thank you all very much for a very swift meeting, and hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'm sure you'll all be busy and encouraging our communities for Super Saturday to ensure that we are fully protected. I'm pretty sure Tamaki Makaurau will get over 90% this weekend. I'm pretty keen for that. We've been doing a fantastic job as a city, and you are all being big parts of that. So thank you so much. Look after each other, and we will all talk soon. Kia ora. Thanks for staff as well.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Richard.
Richard.